Welcome to Stats and Scheme. I am Shawn, Syed, joined as always by my good friend Tej Seth. We are back off our longest break of the Stats and Scheme run, a long 1 week hiatus as we get into the offseason here. Our plan from now till really the first week of next season is to keep our usual Tuesday spot in your feed, go through a long list of topics that we put together. Tej has been working hard on a lot of research. I'm excited to talk through it with some football context. We'll start with shows around the combine, free agency. We'll probably even go to league meeting time, of course, draft related shows. And then during the summer, we'll get into some of those topics that we mentioned during the year. Finally, get our pressure to sack episode leading up to hopefully some division previews in July and August. With all that said, Tej, how was your week off from talking into a microphone with me? And where are we at on the missing football meter?
The missing football effect size is really big right now. On Saturday, I went to a Bunger show in Detroit, went to the after party afterward. It was cool. But while I was there, I was thinking, man, I really want to be watching Panthers Bears Thursday night football right now. Like I'd give up a lot to have that experience. So, I've definitely been missing it, but I'm excited to do these off-season episodes with you. I appreciate you putting together a pretty good schedule for us. So I'm excited to get into it. How about you though? How's the no football life going for you on the weekends?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I almost don't even want to talk about it. I like after the Super Bowl ended and then we finished up some work there. I feel like there was a hey, we just did 6 months of this really hard work, and obviously the prep goes into the preseason. This felt really good, like end of a run, and then now it's like give me the games back. I need it. Like 2 years ago, you sent me. I was like complaining about some game, and you're like, hey, you're gonna miss this in the off season, and that's always held true, and that really just frames my thoughts on exactly. Yeah, give me whatever Thursday night football game that you can give me, and I will take it. But today, we're going to talk about some of your research around combine metric predictiveness for offensive players. There's an article up at sumersports.com connected to it as well. You tried to find the correlation between specific performance and combine drills and other measurables and see how they correlated with production in the NFL. But before that, I did want to talk about the combine a little bit more generally. On the Sumer Sports Show podcast feed, the Monday episode had Eric and Thomas talk about the combine from a GM perspective. They and some other people from Sumer will be at the combine. So if you are there, do be sure to say hello. And talking to some of the other scouts and former general managers on our internal scouting staff at Sumer, it always stands out how many of them just keep mentioning the importance of the interviews at the combine, which is of course not something that we will see live on our TV this week, but it is very impactful for teams as they try to decide if players are a fit for their team and just try and gain more information that way. That, of course, along with medicals are another thing that we just don't get to see, but in some cases can have a lot of impact. And teams may be sending less people over the years, but getting official measurements on players can be really informative. And, some coaches will get networking in. A lot of scouting work, of course, at this point has already been done. But all right, Tej, let's get to the fun stuff. You have been to the combine before. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience at the combine, and then maybe some of the memorable combine performances that either there or you can think of kind of from the past.
So I went to the combine last year. It was coincidentally spring break for me when I was still in school, so that was really nice. And it was an overall great experience. Got to see Eric Thomas, Shawn Clement, Paul Saban, like all people from Sumer that were like actually in team meetings, meeting with multiple NFL teams, pitching the products that Sumer has to offer these teams. And that was cool to sit in on a couple of those and just kind of observe how those meetings went. But other than that, like overall, it's just like a fantastic networking event. And I usually don't like using that word because like it seems like very business schooly to me, but it's like you just meet so many people, people that through Twitter, but maybe have never met in person, people that you've hung out with before and like are also there because they share the same interest as you. And it was an awesome experience. Like you're just talking the whole time. I didn't have a voice by like the fourth day I was there, and actually going to the combine itself was pretty cool too, because the stadium isn't filled at all. Like it's actually pretty empty when you go into there. And I went on the day where defensive linemen were doing their drills. So like got to see Nolan Smith just like tear up the combine, run like a really quick 40-yard dash. I think he did pretty well at other drills too. And like seeing that in person, you're reminded like, oh yeah, these guys are just like a different level of athlete. I think about like specific combine moments in particular where it's like Jordan Davis, like another Georgia guy, like just the way that the speed at which he ran the 40-yard dash for someone of his size is probably one of the more memorable things for me. Think about one when I'm younger was Calvin Johnson where he was borrowing someone's cleats and he ended up running, 40-yard dash at a very high speed, especially when you adjust it for his weight. So those are some of the ones that stuck out to me. How about you? Do you have any memorable combine moments?
Yeah, I feel like I think it was George Kittle who had like a nosebleed. So he's like
Oh yeah.
doing his workout with like a plug in his nose pretty much. Obviously the Julio Jones workout is near and dear to Sumer's heart through Thomas Dimitroff. And then like everything, even outside of the combine, like around Anthony Richardson was so fun last year. Cause I mean, I think we both felt there was so much outside of just the athleticism, but like you said, like like within the kind of 100th percentile, there's like 99th percentile athletes, like there's even another tier there. So that is really fun. And like you mentioned, there's obviously a lot of media people at the combine. So that's it sounds like a fun time, Tish. I'm glad you got to go last year, and I wonder who will be this year's Nolan Smith in that way. So getting into the research, Tish, I do want to address some things up front, or maybe ask you about them. So we're talking about correlation between specific metrics and then production. And when we talked about it and kind of texted back and forth about it, my first thought was there can't be like a massive correlation between just like what someone's numbers in a drill are and their future production. So my assumption is that the correlation for really everything we're going to talk about is going to be like pretty low. Is that true?
For most of the positions we talk about, it will be pretty low. Just when you map athleticism in general to production in the NFL, and we only did offensive players just because the production is much easier measured for offensive players than defensive players. But the one position where athleticism really sticks out to me, and we'll get to this as we go through this episode, is tight end. Like that's the position where I would be following the closest of this year's combine to see like how some of these top tight ends, Brock Bowers, Jatavian Sanders, if they're hitting that high end athletic score, whatever method you want to use to get athletic score, whether it's a predictive model or the relative athletic score that Kentley Platt does, and like different stuff like that. Like if those top tight ends are also hitting their high end athletic measures, like they're good to go, like they should be drafted wherever they're being mocked. But if they don't hit those measures, like you can start to question a little bit of their future production in the NFL. So like I think tight end, it holds a lot of weight, but other positions it definitely holds less weight. And like you can factor in scouting grades and production and different stuff like that to predict their performance in the league.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And, obviously we're not approaching this episode as, all right, well, this player had the highest vertical jump. Like they're going to be the best receiver. Like it's obviously, more complicated than that. It is an information point as part of a larger picture. And I'm excited to talk about tight ends there. I know Eric Eager has written a bunch around, tight ends and those sorts of things, particularly when they break out. So I'm excited to get to that. And Tish, you want to address anything with like selection bias kind of in the, the people that are invited to the combine, whether players like only choose specific drills or they're like, hey, I'm training for this one measurement and really like much else. So do you want to talk about selection bias there?
That's a great point to bring up. There definitely is selection bias when you do this type of analysis. And, I think the combine is really good because it's like a standardized, way to measure players. There's often like these different pro days where they say that like some schools have a faster track or, their timings are a little bit quicker on 40-yard dashes, different stuff like that. But like the combine, like everyone's kind of running in similar conditions. It definitely probably decreases their high end performance a little bit. You're not home. You're sleeping in like a hotel bed. You're going through all these interviews and events throughout the week, and like you might be tired by the time that you're up to actually perform. Like there definitely is outside factors that can still influence it. But the selection bias does apply in the sense where, yeah, like you mentioned, like players are going to be doing the events that they want to do. You have to get invited to be at the combine. So it kind of rules out a couple players every year that get drafted that don't go to the combine. So it's different stuff like that kind of gets meshed together.
That makes sense. And I don't want to just like boohoo the whole combine. Like it is obviously very fun to watch. It obviously it's really impactful for a lot of these players. It's kind of unfortunate sometimes the fall for some of these players that comes from the combine. I'm thinking on the positive side, like Adam Thielen, who he ran a really nice 40 at kind of a regional combine and then really had a legitimacy at the NFL combine. That could be someone else, or I could have gotten that wrong. So looking forward to the fact check on that. But Tage, I mean, we just kind of water down the whole entire thing. Like, do we end the pod here, or do you think we keep on going?
Well, there's value definitely at out of the combine. Like I think we'll definitely get into there's specific events to watch for each position.
Okay, and then I do want to talk about tracking data because I know you've worked with it. We've talked about it a bunch. I do think, there is obviously so much value for tracking data as opposed to just looking at, what's the end number on one specific drill, whether it's we measure how fast a player is accelerating in and out of a cut on a route, where I think it was the Senior Bowl that put out a bunch of good data on that, or, how fast they get out of a stance. And then, of course, things like computer vision, where you can translate this is how fast a player is moving on their game film to a number like the 40. So do you want to talk anything about kind of tracking data or what you see there?
First off, I'm so impressed that you're talking about computer vision. Some of the film background. You're like, it's cool to hear how you've been able to pick up all this stuff and to talk about it on a podcast. But yeah, I mean, I think it's you bring up another really interesting point where you think about like the kind of the famous story now with Cooper Kupp, where he goes to the Senior Bowl. The GPS tracking data at the Senior Bowl show that he was the fastest wide receiver at the Senior Bowl, or maybe even like the fastest overall player, just because like they had 3 days worth of that data between the practices and the games. Goes to the combine and does not run a good 40-yard dash. And Brad Holmes was on record, kind of celebrating the fact that Cooper Kupp didn't do great at the combine because he knew that Kupp was fast, but from the tracking data, but might not show up for other teams that aren't looking at that data. Cooper Kupp drops a little bit in the draft. The Rams, draft him, and the rest is history there. So like you have those different types of stories where the tracking data can really help these teams have the additional information to draft. You think about when you look at college specifically, there's no status quo across the country where like not every player is wearing a chip in their shoulder pads. You're going to have to use things like you brought up with computer vision. Like our friends at StatsBomb are doing a really cool job of that. And, I think that instead of looking at max speed, which is often, focused on too much by media or even maybe by teams in particular, like average speed in particular situations can mean a lot. So for wide receivers, that would be the average speed that they run go routes or post routes in. For running backs, that's like the average speed that they hit a hole, when they don't have to force a missed tackle from like 0 to 10 yards or something. Like the different average speeds that you can use on subsets of plays where players are running forward can be really valuable for you.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the kind of players where they maybe put up a number at the combine that kind of gets people off of their their scent a little bit. I think that Kyle Hamilton may have been one there, where
Oh yeah.
another player where this player is playing so fast, but his 40 time is different. So I think that as time goes on, you maybe see less of those where you can't hide some of those. I know I mentioned computer vision, but Tej, I'll give you the floor for a minute here. I don't know if you want to, can you just like define computer vision, maybe talk about it for a second, just to give the people an idea of kind of what it is.
Right. So computer vision is this pretty complicated but very impressive technology where it is trained on images and videos, and it has some data, previously put in that it can pick up on different things that are happening in these images and videos and tag them. And so like the pretty famous example about this is a chess game where the pieces are moving around the chessboard, and there's a video of it, and the computer vision software can tag like where the knight is, where the rook is, and kind of be able to distill what's happening in the chess game, and then feed it into something where it can play out the rest of that chess match. And so for football, like what our friends at StatsBomb are doing, or there's also Real Analytics, which is doing something similar. Like they're applying this similar technology to football, where they're able to pick up on all 22 players on the field, where the ball is, and they're able to get this really impressive data, of how often these quarterbacks are hitting their receivers on target, because where the ball is, from the all 22 angles that are getting fed into the software. So it's really cool data that is like pretty untapped. It's still relatively new, but I think teams will start to use it more and more as they get used to it and they can build out their models.
I think, yeah. And then even further than that, right? So you can pretty much like from the computer vision extrapolate, okay, this player moved in a certain way. We can measure their speed. And then you can take that. And for a player that is not running at the combine, they can kind of like, you can make a model to project like, all right, well, if they ran at the combine based on their game speed, they would have ran around this. That's something that like, I'm not talking out of thin air for that, right?
No, I mean, you nailed that. Like when we would have a player do like 4 combine events, and then maybe he would skip a couple, we would have to interpolate what we thought he would fill in for the other common events. So like you take their height, weight, and 40-yard dash time, and you make a model to predict their 3-cone drill if they didn't run the 3-cone, if they didn't actually participate in it. And so like obviously that's not going to be 100% accurate. Like it definitely is a step in the right direction, but now you have this play speed that you can use to actually fill in and get a much better representation of those samples that are missing in your data.
All right, so we've talked about chess and computers, and good use of the word interpolate there, Tej. I really, really impressed coming off of our 1 week break. I'm glad about that. All right, and I said let's get to the fun stuff. We got out that stuff out of the way. Now the real fun stuff. So how do you want to break it up as we get into what you looked at? What position do you want to start off with first?
I feel like we got to start with quarterback, right?
Yeah, I mean, of course we have to start off with quarterbacks. Come on, I don't even know why I asked that question. Why don't you go through, maybe just pick one of the measures that you looked at, kind of maybe your broad takeaway. And if you want to give, correlation numbers just for the R squared fans at home as well, I'll leave that one up to you.
So just like a little bit of background before I jump into this and how I did this. So for each position, I took some sort of production measure, the predictions of quarterbacks, it's EPA per season. And that per season is important because when we're looking at things like height and weight, like I feel like the ability to play a full season matters. So, when we look at quarterbacks in general, the combine event that most strongly correlates to their production in the NFL in terms of EPA per season is broad jump. And so that broad jump correlation is 0.26. R value, R squared, obviously would be lower than that. But we want the signal in direction there. So that's why I use the correlation coefficient. So not something that's super strongly correlated, but you do see that there is like kind of a cutoff for broad jump where if you have a high broad jump, it doesn't mean that you'll be a good quarterback, but a low broad jump is going to make it a pretty uphill battle for you in the NFL. There hasn't been a quarterback with under 110-inch broad jump that has been able to sustain starting quarterback play in the NFL. And so I think that, Jared Goff, Baker Mayfield, they cut it really close, but they've been able to sustain being starters, even though it's been multiple teams, like they've been starters basically their entire career. But as you continue to go higher up the broad jump, you'll see less chance of players not being able to, not play in the NFL basically.
Yeah, when you sent this over, I was like, what do we do with this? Do we make like quarterback broad jump matters t-shirts? Like that was so interesting. I will say from at least a measurement standpoint, I am certainly interested in those cutoffs. I think that's like an interesting spot to look at. Not saying that, hey, there will never be a quarterback with that is productive underneath a certain broad jump number. Like I don't think anyone should be taking or is taking, maybe on the absolute extremes, but I don't think most people are looking at it kind of in that way. So, okay. So, and then Anthony Richardson, where was he on like your kind of, or like the historical broad jumps?
Yeah. So Anthony Richardson had the longest broad jump of any quarterback since 2011.
Okay. Love that. Yeah. The historical in that direction, I think is more fun where you're like, if you're going to draft someone, why not take like the absolute, like the freak of the freaks is I think a good way. And I don't know. Yeah. Maybe let's continue on the list here. We won't just talk about, well, where does broad jumping kind of translate into like a player in the pocket. Why don't you talk through the other metrics that you looked at for quarterbacks?
So weight is another measure that, they get weight at the combine. It has, 0.16 correlation coefficient to production. So again, not super strongly correlated, but there is some signal there. And I think it is an underrated factor for when we talk about quarterbacks in general. I think that Eric has done a great job of bringing this up multiple times on him and Thomas's show. It's like you saw Joe Burrow at 221 pounds play injured last year, and it was not good, right? Like great quarterback when healthy, when playing injured, it was very hard for him to find success. When Josh Allen, who's at 237, or Justin Herbert, 236, they have 15 pounds on Burrow. When they play injured, like they're still able to sustain decent level quarterback play, in part because like they're heavier, like maybe their bodies can handle it more. Anthony Richardson, again, is someone who was 244 pounds, which again makes all of his combine measurements really impressive last year. But there are success stories for lighter quarterbacks. Kyler Murray and Brock Purdy like kind of don't fit the mold, and that's why there's no cutoff really for weight for quarterbacks that I found. But what I kind of want to hear from you is like when you're watching quarterbacks, and then when you're studying film, like, can you see their weight, or like, the difference of 15 pounds between two quarterbacks, like, have an effect on how they react to hits, how they play, how they not don't get tackled in the pocket? Like, is that something that plays out for you?
That's interesting. I think on like the extreme ends of it, you see Josh Allen, who is more than happy to just be like a battering ram at different points. That's, I think, an extreme example. For the smaller guys, I don't know. I guess I don't necessarily, of course, you're going to look at the visual and be like, okay, well, this player is a lot smaller. I think it's more interesting to track kind of year over year, where it seems like Lamar kind of like thickened up a little bit. I think Tua seemed like he was pretty cognizant of putting on a little bit more muscle in his offseason training. And then, of course, combined with the kind of like learning how to fall in different ways to kind of protect his neck. So to me, like, that is a little bit more interesting. And then that can also show up in a different direction, where a player that is trying to kind of bulk up in a certain way, maybe they look a little bit slower, or they're playing a little bit different. I think Lamar is sometimes a tough example because he is in such an out of this world athlete, but I do think that's a point where it is kind of an interesting one. So we got broad jump and then weight. When you mentioned Burrow, that's an interesting example as well. I think, Tej, I guess I just keep using the word interesting, finding ways to describe this. But that to me is, well, Burrow's superpower in a lot of ways is that those really subtle pocket moves. So, like, do I chalk that up to weight? Like, I can't just just say, okay, well, Burrow's at 221 pounds. Like, this is kind of an issue. And I think maybe injury modeling will be something we talk about later on. But for Allen and Herbert, the other guys at, that 235, 236, 237 number, they have just absolute cannons for an arm. So I think if they were less mobile in the pocket, they're still able to do a lot of those big things, where Burrow, his, shifting just a little bit and moving linebackers in that way is such a positive thing. So we got, like I said, we got broad jump, we got weight. What else you got for us, Tej?
So the other thing that like kind of strongly correlates, or I mean, not strongly, but kind of correlates with, production in the NFL is age. And this is not something that you measure at the combine, but this is something that comes up around draft season, is the age. And, of the 15 youngest quarterbacks to be drafted since 2015, only 4 of them have had a negative EPA per season. Sam Darnold was the youngest quarterback in this time frame to be drafted. Didn't work out for him. Maybe he gets a second win in San Francisco, but it didn't work out with the New York Jets. Josh Rosen, Deshaun Kaiser, and Sam Howell. So like, these are all the 4 younger quarterbacks that got drafted that didn't work out. But then you have like a ton of success stories. Like, obviously Patrick Mahomes is the highest. Like, he was really young when he got drafted. There's been some other young quarterbacks that have come out early, like maybe haven't stayed until their senior and have also got drafted. So like, when you look ahead to this draft in particular, like there's a difference between Caleb Williams coming out at the age that he's coming out versus Jaden Daniels, someone who transferred and stayed until they were 24 years old, coming out. Like, that should play a role in how well they're going to do in the NFL. Like, obviously it's not the end all be all, but I think it's something to take into account when evaluating these quarterbacks.
Yeah, I want to harp on that point for a second, and that you said this is like not the end all be all. I think even, in the article, it's not like you're pushing and saying like, you cannot draft a quarterback that's age 23, 24, 25. That's obviously not the point. We're just looking at the smallest kind of things on the margin as part of the combine. So age is interesting to me. Tej, let's go ahead and chalk up another use of the word interesting there. So a quarterback, for example, if they've played through all those seasons, part of it is that they've taken a lot of snaps. There's probably something positive there, but then also, if they were of a certain quality, you would have expected them to go to the draft. Is there something where you say, okay, well, they transferred once or twice? Maybe is that a negative thing? Is that a positive thing where they're looking for a situation going up? I don't know. Do you have just like kind of a take in general, maybe even outside of that there, where you want to like lean away from an older quarterback because maybe you think that a younger quarterback has a higher future? Or is it that, you're a general manager, your average years that you're going to be able to work there is like 3.5 years. So it doesn't matter how young that quarterback is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I do think that's like a good point to bring up, where it's like, if you're kind of in a situation where you have to win that season, like maybe you do take the 23-year-old quarterback in the draft just because like they have more reps and they can give you a better chance of winning that year. But when you look at these quarterbacks that are coming out in the draft that were young, like, Lamar Jackson and Jordan Love and Jared Goff and Trevor Lawrence, CJ Stroud, like these types of quarterbacks, like had success in college. They have the tools to make it work in the NFL. And like, that's why they felt confident enough to leave college and come out when they came out. But then like you look on the other end of that and you have some quarterbacks that transferred or had to stay extra to build up their draft stock, like a Kenny Pickett or a Will Levis or an Aiden O'Connell. Like these types of quarterbacks like stayed longer in college, like built up their experience, and then tried to apply that to the NFL, and it just didn't work out as well for them. So if I was a GM, like I'd definitely be looking to draft the younger quarterback, but you still have to have the holistic approach of taking everything into account.
Yeah, of course. Small data points of a big picture. I feel like I keep saying that because I don't want anyone to come back and be like, well, Tej said that age, it matters in this way. What else you got kind of finishing up with things for quarterbacks?
Yeah, so I mean, with the two combine measurements, broad jump and three cone being like the ones that show up pretty important for quarterbacks, while like shuttle, vertical, 40 like doesn't really matter as much. Like when you watch quarterbacks on film, like do you see some of those things translating more when it comes to like their ability to, especially like three cone, like their quickness of how they're able to get around defenders?
Yeah, I think that change of direction, which is something that comes from three cone, that is incredibly important because in the NFL, you are going to have to be able to produce off schedule at different points. Even something as small as play fake one way and then go the other way, that is, part of a change of direction thing. Now, I guess I don't watch quarterbacks and say, oh, I bet he has a high broad jump or something like that. Maybe for Josh Allen, when you see him leap over a defender and just clear them, you can kind of think of it that way. But I guess I see those two as they're expressions of these are athletic traits for a player. And as we continue to see, you're going to have to be able to find your way outside of the pocket or be creative in that playmaking inside of the pocket. We think of, Stroud and Love certainly as good examples of that. So I guess, those is kind of where I would see that off script playmaking, and then however much you tie that in whatever way to athleticism. And then there's of course there is like a feel to it. I think there are different ways that we can kind of quantify that, but there is like a little bit of a nature where there are some players that are effective in the pocket and there's some aren't. And I think you can use film and then even combine it with numbers in different ways. But all right, let's get off the quarterbacks. Tej, let's get on to the running backs. Why don't you talk to us about some metrics for running backs in the combine?
Yeah, so for running backs, age is a pretty big factor again, but just looking at like what's going to happen on combine week, weight is so important for running backs. And when I talked to my friend Zach Zenner, who used to play running back, for the Lions in the NFL, like he mentioned to me, he was like, you should be very careful if you take a running back under 200 pounds. Like it gets dicey when you take a running back of that's pretty light, like under 200 pounds. And Jahmyr Gibbs, James Cook, they barely fall under this 200 pounds mark, but they've made it work. Kyron Williams, showed a lot of success his second year in the NFL, but did get injured. So like it'll be something to follow as we go forward. But when you look at some of the best running backs of this past era, like looking 2016 onward, they've been 220 pounds or more, like Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Ezekiel Elliott. Like they're all running backs who cleared that 220 pound mark. So, if you're under 200 pounds, you can make it work under the right circumstances, but there definitely is correlation between how much you weigh and how good of a running back you are.
I think that part of that is it's health related, right?
Yeah.
So are you able to take all those hits? So to me, there's at least like the foundation and the thinking there is connected, where you're a player that is going to take so much contact. And now is it that, you see smaller players be able to take those hits and be fine. Of course, you're going to have some total freak injuries. And then some players, maybe more at the quarterback position, if they're just doing weigh-ins and not doing anything else, they're going to just really focus on their weight, and they're probably not going to play at that same number kind of throughout the season. So that one's kind of interesting to go back and forth on as well, because in my mind, I guess growing up, it makes sense where it's like, you just want bigger players there. But I love that some of those examples you mentioned where those are the people that they're big and they're fast and they're also really good at what they do. I think that did you look into the 40 at all for running backs?
For the 40, it doesn't really seem to have a strong signal of success in the NFL for running backs. I think it's interesting because teams still do value the 40. Like the correlation for draft value compared to 40 is much stronger than 40 to actual NFL production.
Yeah, and I know we love things like the missed tackles is in that you created in college is something that for whatever reason, that's able to translate to the next level. I do think that that's something specifically where GPS tracking and really all of the tracking data has a lot of things that it can bring where it's, are you accelerating to the hole fast enough? Are you accelerating through the hole fast enough? Are you able to, at that kind of second phase, and you kind of cut the running into physical different parts of kind of where you are, kind of how fast you're going, because, of course, 40-yard dash is it's a combination of acceleration and speed and then your top end speed, but you can, I think, kind of do that a little bit different. And then you had mentioned age. I think that probably connects to carries maybe in a little bit, right? Where, of course, I hate to think about running backs where it's, you just get to a certain number of carries and then things go downhill. But those hits do certainly, I think, add up over time. So does that kind of make sense is that why we think of age and carries as being, or age being something where it's like maybe not kind of the best thing for some of the combine running backs?
Definitely. I do think there's the covariance there of like how many carries you're entering the league with, and then like all the carries that you kind of rack on. And if you eventually hit a limit, with the amount of carries that you get to, where your production starts to fall off a little bit. So that's a really good point to bring up.
All right, let's get on to wide receivers. What do you got there?
So for wide receiver, I think that the combine is really like not super valuable for learning that much about these players. Like I think that wide receiver is such a nuanced position where you have route running and catchability and yards after catchability, like that you can't really pick up on a lot of the intricacies of the position at the combine. But there are some smaller signals, vertical jump, bench press, like those are two things that kind of seem to matter a little bit for wide receivers. Like those are the things to watch out for. And vertical jump obviously makes intuitive sense. What is really interesting though is, again, 40 time doesn't have much of a signal of future wide receiver production, but teams still value 40 time as the biggest thing that they get from the combine in terms of draft value. And, that's how you get like a John Ross situation to happen where he runs a 4.22, tied for the fastest in NFL history, ends up getting drafted very high by the Bengals and not working out. And there's been other players similar to that haven't had some success, but ran a very fast 40. Like I think about the recent examples: Elijah Moore, Curtis Samuel, Rondell Moore. Players that probably had their draft value get boosted because of their 40-yard dash time.
I like that you mentioned just wide receiver nuance, and that's a really good one where I think that tracking data can do different things there, particularly like I mentioned, that acceleration, deceleration for particularly if you're a route runner in the slot. I think that would be really, really helpful, even if you're someone that is on the outside. And then if are using some of that tracking data where, particularly, I guess, more in computer vision, where since receivers do have more examples where they're running 40 yards down the field, you're better able to kind of predict what their 40-yard dash time would be, as opposed to some positions that aren't really just sprinting down the field for that length. So that's something that maybe can kind of come up in the future. Well, let's get to maybe the favorite one that you looked at, tight ends, as relates to this.
Yeah. So like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, like tight end is the position that you can learn a lot about from the combine. And you really see strong correlations in a lot of these events to NFL production. 40-yard dash, broad jump, vertical jump, and 3-cone drill are all like decently correlated with your amount of yards per season. So there's a caveat that I'm not really measuring blocking ability. I'm just measuring your receiving production here. And so those are things to look at when you look overall at these tight ends and how much production they can have from a receiving standpoint in the NFL. And you look at the leaders in receiving yards last year: George Kittle, Travis Kelce, Evan Ingram, TJ Hawkinson, Sam Laporta, David Njoku. They all had relative athletic scores that were 9 or greater. All 6 of those tight ends were 9 or greater. So there hasn't really been a very successful tight end that ran slower than a 4.7. Hawkinson, Andrews, Ingram, Pitts, Kittle, like all tight ends, I think that have done well in the NFL or will continue to do well in the league, and they all ran pretty fast 40-yard dashes. So if your tight end is dropping below 4.7, it starts to get a little bit of an uphill battle for them in the league.
And then for weight for tight ends, I know we see that picture of Brock Bowers next to Gronk, and then everyone wants to kind of make their own comments. Anything on kind of height and weight for tight ends?
So what's really interesting about height and weight for tight ends, and again, I think this is the function of mapping it to the receiving yards per season and not like the overall measure of receiving plus blocking. But height and weight are negatively correlated, and it's not super strongly, but like I wouldn't be worried about Brock Bowers just if he shows up to the combine and he ends up being lighter than you'd expect other tight ends to be. It's not something that you should write him off for. Like there could be other valid concerns of him at the combine, but I wouldn't say height or weight would influence a lot of my thinking about him.
And then from a scheme perspective for tight ends, it does feel like coaches are doing a little bit better of a job where it's some of the blocks they're asked to make just aren't the like same level of difficulty where I don't know if you're a fullback however many 10, 15 years ago and you're running ISO and trying to like knock out that middle linebacker. But if you're getting put in a formation where you have two tight ends to one side and you're working with another person just blocking down someone, we see like that. Think about the Lions game versus the 49ers where tight ends are just kind of blocking those defensive ends down and someone's kind of going around the edge for the outside. And then Tej, I did want to talk about for tight ends, I think Eric Eager put out something maybe a few years back just on like age curves for tight ends. Sometimes like their peak happens a little bit later, right? So there for like Njoku was an example where if I think that he used where if you want to say, maybe you overdrafted him, all right, whatever. But then at that point, do you add a second contract to a player for them? A lot of times, like you think of Hawkinson, where he's someone who I think that maybe was undervalued, and then the Vikings were able to take advantage in that way. Obviously, we talk about like, all right, well, how much is a tight end making? But I also want to talk about, I think that it's sometimes you look at a tight end and say, oh, well, this person is just going to be a receiver. And it feels like I love that idea. I really, really do. I love the idea of positionless football. I love to think about it. But it feels like a lot of times, maybe it's just that like we're just not that great at picking which tight ends are the best. I feel like that. Tej, any kind of thoughts on any of those things there?
I mean, you nailed such a good point there that I wanted to talk about, where it's like there's so much discourse about Brock Bowers where he should go in the draft. Like, would the Chargers be better off taking Brock Bowers over Malik Neighbors or Roma Dunze, like a receiver at 5, if they wanted to go pass catcher? If you condition on all of those players being good NFL starters, Brock Bowers makes sense because you get him on a pretty big surplus value on his second contract. You wouldn't get much surplus value out of him on his rookie contract as much as you would out of Neighbors and Adunze, but his second contract, you can pay him early, especially if he breaks out at that age 25 mark that Eric has found being like pretty good for tight ends to break out on. But it's very hard to draft tight ends, right? Like, I know as a Lions fan seeing it multiple times, especially Eric Ebron, like it's hard to take these tight ends in the first round. Like they have a very flat draft curve relative to other positions. So we can't condition on all these players being good in the NFL. So it comes down to like some of these other, measures of when you're looking at tight ends in particular, in the first round, like you'd rather take the shot on a second, third round tight end that's a very highly athletic player, just because like we know that it has signal, and we've seen from the past that like that's the type of tight end type that will work in the NFL.
And yeah, sometimes I don't like looking at it as like such an academic exercise. Obviously, I mean, me and you aren't putting helmets on and playing in the NFL, and the article is an article. It is a little bit of an academic exercise just to do that. But I am certainly going to be team fun first. I think it is important to recognize, we, the pub, I can say we like the public, and then a lot of times you draft players and they just don't work out for tens of millions of reasons, whether it's something that you could say is quote their fault or something that is very clearly not the player's fault. So there's so many reasons, but that's why, like I said, fun first, draft draft the players wherever you want, but be cognizant of, it's like, what is a slam dunk pick? Yep. Kind of doesn't exist. Unfortunately. I wish that we could kind of point out who is going to be really good at a much better clip. Tej, why don't let's get to the offensive line before we head out here. Let's go, I think tackles first on the outside. What do you got there?
So for offensive tackle, I didn't map it to any production stuff. I just mapped it to playing time, like the percentage of snaps that you played per season, basically. And again, there weren't any like super strong correlations or anything. But for offensive tackle, it was interesting that 40-yard dash was like the most highly correlated thing that happens at the combine that ends up mapping to playing time in the NFL. And teams do realize this. Like teams will draft players based on their 40 time. Like you look at some of the successful type of offensive tackles that also ran fast 40s, like Taylor Decker, Laramie Tunzel, Ronnie Stanley, players like that ended up getting drafted high. They ran fast 40s and they went on to have good NFL careers.
Yeah, I'm just such a proponent that offensive linemen are unbelievably athletic. I think sometimes it's hard to remember that, maybe because you're comparing like, okay, well, this player was not fast enough to tackle like Lamar Jackson, for example, but the way they move is really art. So I do want to make sure we appreciate that. I think with tackles like bench press is something where you probably think of, okay, like they're pushing and they're kind of using that motion. I think there are a lot of more specific like Duke Manyweather at OL Masterminds I think he has like a good like physical setup where a player, like the way that they're having their force measured is a little bit just more, I think I'd say, realistic to kind of what they would do in a game. So I think that's important. And then did you talk about interior offensive line at all, or did you look at that?
Yeah, so I did look at interior offensive line as well, and Eric and Thomas talked a little bit about this too. But 3-cone drill is the one to watch for interior offensive line. Shuttle and broad jump are also up there as well. So I do want to hear from you. Like, is this just about like interior offensive linemen needing to be quick, needing to get to the next level? Like, where do you kind of see that play in for them?
I think agility is so important, and then particularly like, are you able to get out of your stance really quick? Like the angles that you have to take at really every position on the offensive line, they have to happen so fast. Obviously, you have like a little bit of an advantage, or you should theoretically have an advantage over the defense in that you know where the ball is going, you know when the snap is going to happen. Usually, obviously, on the road, sometimes that doesn't happen. I think now defenders are doing a better job of being able to just, you're reacting off an offensive player's movement instead of just kind of staring at the ball. So yeah, I think that's going to be mostly agility based. I think it was Josh Norris from Underdog has like a chart that he put out where it's a cutoff. I'm pretty sure it's 4.3 time, but I always love seeing those cutoffs. And like Tish, the quarterback broad jump, it matters, right? That's gonna be our takeaway today.
Yeah, I mean, get the t-shirts made. But actually, one more question for you: if we had a combine at Sumer, where do you think you kind of stack up relative to the other people that we have working here, like percentile wise or something?
That's a great question for those of you wondering at home. People at Sumer, we have, of course, Eric Eager, former college athlete. I'm not sure if everyone else's former college athlete perspective, but again, I think that brings up a good point where just because you're a college athlete doesn't mean you're going to show up great at the combine. Would I take Eric to back me down in the post? Yes, I think I would rather throw the ball to him than me in that situation, but got a nice little turnaround. Kayla, I think I do pretty well. I'm not sure what all of my numbers would be, but I'm ready for it. We also have some power lifters on the Sumer staff. So Tej, I think some of the slim guys like us, we may get knocked down in like bench press and some metrics like that. How about you? Do you think I know I saw the video, I think it was you and your brother running the 40. Did you win that race for the record?
No, so I lost that race. He's 3 years younger than me. It was a little bit embarrassing, but I mean I downed like some tacos before the race. Don't want to make it excuses, but tacos were sitting pretty heavy. So I ran. I think it was like right under a 5.1. When I ran it a couple months ago at another thing, it was like 4.98. So you feel really slow when you run it, and then you have like offensive linemen like Charles Cross also running like a faster 40-yard dash than you, but Eric was nice. He was like, oh, it's actually not a bad time for like a non-NFL player or whatever. Like the times are skewed, but I still thought it was pretty bad. Bench press would be my like what I would fall off on against, because I think I can bench probably like 155, so I couldn't do the 225 that they're doing. But the power lifters we have here, like Parker Fleming or Chris Long, they should be able to do the 225, so they would beat us there. And then the college athletes like Eric, Ben Brown, Sam Brookhouse, they would also be able to do pretty well, I feel like. But maybe we're in that next tier after that, me and you.
I love, I feel like we've done a great job today. We come back from the break, we get computer vision. We're talking about how much are you bench pressing, you losing a 40-yard dash to your little brother because of tacos. This is what the off season is, right, Tej? We got to get all this out. We got to get all the information out there before we can come back for the season, huh?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we might have to do pick some TV show and start doing reviews of that in the off season if we run out of content here.
Well, I got to see Dune 2 on Sunday, but once I get the movie podcast Tej, on our feed, we can talk about it then. But let's get out of here. Thank you everyone for listening for another episode of Stats and Scheme. Tell us what you like, what you didn't like, and if you would order one of Tej's quarterback broad jumps matters. Sure. Visit sumersports.com. Follow us on Twitter and YouTube at Sumer Sports. Leave a nice rating wherever you choose to be. Next week, and then we'll talk about something around how quick rookies are impacting their teams and which positions maybe that has more of an impact at. But most importantly, enjoy the rest of your week, and we will see you next time.